South FFL, are you ready for your weekly analysis? Yes. Yes. Yes.
Special segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the South FFL Emergency Recap. In this week's episode, I'm going to be highlighting big plays and players from week 5. I'm also going to be looking at each matchup for the upcoming week. And just like last time, by the time you guys are watching this video, Thursday Night Football has already been played. So I will go through some takeaways from that Thursday night game as well. Without further ado, let's get started. Again, I'm going to go ahead and start from the top of the scoreboards here. And it's my matchup against Christians. All I do is win. We have DJ Moore, Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson is for Christian's top scorers, and for my team we got Lamar Jackson, Brian Thomas Jr., and the Vikings defense. Starting off with Sam Darnold on the Christians team. Coming into this game, having thrown at least 2 touchdowns in his last 4 games. This week was the first game Sam Darnold did throw a single touchdown, but instead his defense turned up, and Van Kiko had his second pick 6 of the season, scoring 18 points for my team. The Jets also had a formidable defense this year, coming in ranking second, currently in average defensive yards. Have only given up 2 passing touchdowns coming into the game. Kenneth Walker didn't really produce much this week. Some of his points came from the 7 receptions he had. The Giants defense got to the backfield rather quickly this week for any big plays to develop, which makes sense because the Seahawks O-line were ranked 23rd coming into week 5. I mean, the Giants defense had 7 sacks this game against Geno. Justice Hill didn't do anything. He's got 3 points. The Jets defense were locking JJ up pretty good. He was targeted 14 times, but only caught 6 of those targets. The defense was holding him a few times though throughout the game. Then we move on to Garrett Wilson. He had a really good game. 13 receptions for 101 yards and a touchdown. He was targeted 23 out of Aaron Rodgers' 54 attempts. That's 42% target share amongst all the Jets receivers. Next, we have Trey McBride with 8.3 points, caught 6 out of 9 targets for 53 yards. DJ Moore really had me worrying this week. Every time I looked back at the Bears game, I feel like I just see a big play from this guy. Targeted 8 times this week, he caught 5 for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. When we go over to my team, though, they went absolutely huge, scoring 149.9 points, leading by Lamar Jackson with 37 points, completing 26 out of 42 attempts for 348 yards and 4 touchdowns. And of course, we're talking about Lamar Jackson here. He also had 55 yards on the rushing game as well. We also got 20 points here from Brian Thomas Jr., who is currently wide receiver 9, caught 5 out of 8 targets for 122 yards and a touchdown. The Colts secondary just couldn't keep up with the Thomas speed here, and Brian Thomas just turns on the Jets, making this man Dallas Flowers look like me out there in Madden with a diving tackle. I also had George Kittle, who continues to dominate. He's tied in 2 coming into the game. Cut the ball 8 times out of 12 targets for 58 yards and a touchdown. The matchup was pretty favorable for Kittle, considering they played the Cardinals defense, who are second to last in the league for passing yards allowed per play, and were ranked 28 in total yards. The Cardinals defense have also been letting tight ends catch all of their targets thrown at them as well. It was really good for Kittle's case there. Next, we got Brian Robinson Jr. now, who although didn't see much of the carries, he scored 2 touchdowns on the goal line for the Commanders. The Commanders continue to rely on him in their red zone as well. Next, we got the Vikings defense, of course, 18 points, 3 interceptions, 1 was a pick 6. They also got to Aaron Rodgers 3 times this game. And on my team, we also had Tyreek Hill, Jordan Mason, James Cook. James Cook had a touchdown reception from Josh Allen in that loss against the Houston Texans. And then Tyreek Hill did turn up a little bit. We're going to continue to monitor him though throughout the rest of the season, because I feel like the QB situation in Miami is still not fixed. Tyler Huntley is still not a solidified QB there. So we'll see the production rate for Tyreek Hill coming in the upcoming weeks. Nothing special about my bench. I do have Ramondre Stevenson, who didn't fumble this week and had 89 yards on the ground and a touchdown. We also had Josh Downs, who's continued to see the increase in target share here. He's got 12 with Joe Flacco in as a quarterback. This next week though, Anthony Richardson is supposed to be back, so I don't know how that's going to affect his target share. So that's going to be it for this matchup. We're going to move on to the next matchup, and we have Houday and the Blowfish against I Hate Kirk Cousins. The top scorers were Mike Evans, Jordan Love, and Chase Brown for the Tate. And for Colin, we got Jamar Chase, CJ Stroud, and Nico Collins. I'll start off on the left here with Jordan Love. Surprisingly, only attempted 26 passes this week compared to the week before with 54. Some of those passes were also dropped by Dontavion Wicks, but apart from that, he completed 15 passes for 224 yards and 2 touchdowns. He only turned the ball over once, and he ran for another 10 yards for 18.2 fantasy points. Next, we have Alvin Kamara against the Chiefs, who only saw 11 carries this week. Kamara was averaging 20 carries coming into week 5. The Chiefs defense was doing a pretty good job holding him to only 26 yards as well, and 40 yards in the receiving yards for 9.6 points. Next for Tate, we have Chase Brown with 15 points, 12 carries, 46 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. Next up, we got Mike Evans, who only saw half the targets from week 4, but still caught 5 of those targets for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns for 20.7 fantasy points. DK Metcalf, 5.5 points. He only caught 4 for 55 yards and lost on a fumble. Again, the all-line for Geno Smith hasn't been the greatest this year, so he doesn't have time to throw the ball to Metcalf as often. So that kind of hurts DK Metcalf points there a little bit, even though they played against Giants that week. Next up, we got Mike Gesicki. Tate picked him up off the waiver wire. He scored 4.1 points. Cam Akers, 9 carries or 42 yards and a touchdown, 11.1 points. But we're gonna move on to the I hate Kirk Cousins now. He's got CJ Stroud against the Bills, 19.25 points, 331 yards, 28 completions, 1 touchdown. Collins also got Aaron Jones, who got hurt in London in the first quarter and was out for the rest of the game, and only scoring 5.8 points for Collins. Next up, we got Zach Moss, saw less carries than Chase Brown on Tate's team with 6.7 points. And then we got Jamar Chase, though. Targeted 12 times, he caught 10 for a big whopping 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. He went berserk this week for Colin. And next we got Nico Collins. Caught 2 of his 2 targets for 78 yards and a touchdown. He did leave the game early in the first half with a hamstring injury, though. So unfortunately for Colin, the Texans have placed Nico Collins on IR. So he'll miss at least 4 weeks. Next up, we got the Jags tight end, Brenton Strange. Caught 4 of his 4 targets for 24 yards and a touchdown, and scoring 10.4 fantasy points. Jerry Jeudy did absolutely nothing. Deshaun Watson continues to be a problem in Cleveland. Jeudy was only targeted 3 times and caught 1 for 16 yards. And then Collins got the Jets defense, of course, scoring 11 points for him. I just gotta say congratulations to Colin for the win here. Next up, we got TitanUp and Team Brax. Joe Burrow decided to come back from the Fashion Week. Darnell Mooney, DeAndre Swift for the top scorers for Erman. For Team Brax, we have Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, and Brock Purdy as the top scorers. Starting off on the left here for Erman, we got Joe Burrow, who went absolutely crazy. He threw 39 times and completed 30 passes for 392 yards and 5 touchdowns, 37.7 fantasy points. Next up for Erman, we got Breece Hall, who continued to disappoint. He's got 9 carries this week and 14 receiving yards for 5.2 points. Next, DeAndre Swift, though, is starting to heat up in Chicago, I feel like. A whopping 21 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. He would have had 2 touchdowns, though, if he wasn't stopped at the goal line, and Roshan Johnson came in and vultured his touchdown from him. He also had 47 receiving yards as well. Next up, we got Stephon Diggs in this game against his former team with 11.2 points. Caught 6 of 8 targets for 82 yards. Next up, Darnell freaking Mooney with 27 points. Kirk Cousins was throwing a ton this game, and Darnell Mooney was targeted 16 times. He caught 9 for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game. I feel like this offense is starting to find its rhythm. Next up, we got Kobe Parkinson. He had 8.7 points. Chris Godwin with 9.1 points. Caught 5 passes for 64 yards. We're going to move on now to Team Brax, starting with Brock Purdy with 15.5 points, 19 completions on 35 attempts for 244 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Davon Achane, though, suffered a concussion during Week 5 game and ended the game with just 2.2 points. Carried the ball 3 times for 18 yards. It's very unfortunate for Braxton. Next up now, we got James Conner, who continues to see the workload he's been getting. With 19 carries, he ran for 86 yards, 2 receptions, and 14 receiving yards. Drake London, much like Darnell Mooney, had a freaking night, man. 27.4 fantasy points, targeted 13 times, caught 12 of them for 154 yards and a touchdown. And I want to highlight again the offense for the Falcons. I think they're finding their rhythm finally, and we could continue to see Kirk Cousins trust his receivers more, trust himself more, and he's going to be throwing a lot more, so maybe Drake London's stock could increase here. Next up, we have Brandon Ayuk. His first breakout game of the season, 18.7 points, 447 yards. He was targeted 12 times, had 8 receptions. Next up, Cole Kmet, 3 receptions for 57 yards, 7.2 fantasy points. Pretty fair for a tight end, to be honest. Then next up, we got Jaden Reed with 4 receptions out of his 6 targets for 78 yards. It's kind of hard to have a high-scoring Jaden Reed when Tucker Kraft went off for the Packers this week. Braxton also had the Bears defense, who also went big in week 5 with 15 points. Braxton also left some big points here on the bench here with Kareem Hunt, 18.2 points, and Roshan Johnson with 14.5 points as well. I gotta say congratulations to Erman this week for the win. Next matchup here, we're gonna be moving on to the Beasts of the Middle East versus Rockstar Domination. The top scorers for Abbas here is gonna be Baker Mayfield, Tyrone Tracy, and Terry McLaurin. On the other side, we got Tucker Kraft, Kaimi Fairbairn, and Josh Allen. Let's pull up the box score here for the Beasts of the Middle East. On the left side, we got Baker Mayfield, who played on Thursday Night Football game. Baker continues to be an asset at the moment for the Bucks. You know, you're talking about a guy who's been bouncing around a couple teams, and he's really shining here in Tampa. 25.2 fantasy points. Despite the Bucks losing, Baker did his thing, you know, throwing for 180 yards for 3 touchdowns and 42 rushing yards. We move on though to Tyler Algier, only had 4 points from that game. Of course, the Falcons offense still have Bijan as a primary back, so that hurts Algier's playing time. He only saw 6 carries for 12 yards and 13 receiving yards on 3 receptions. Next up, we have Tyrone Tracy for the Giants here. You know, with Devin Singletary out for the game for his groin injury, and the other running back, Eric Gray, fumbled on the goal line at the early stages of the game, the Giants now had shifted their work towards Tracy a bit more throughout the game, and he ended up with 13.5 fantasy points on 18 carries and 129 yards. CeeDee Lamb is the next player on his team here with 8.9 points. Lamb caught 5 passes on 9 targets for 62 yards from Dak. They did play the Steelers though, whose defense ranked 11th in points allowed to fantasy wide receivers this season. And Dak did try to throw one to CeeDee in the end zone, but it was picked off. Alright, next up we got Chris Olave with 2 points. He was only targeted 4 times, caught 2 passes for 10 yards. Rashid Shaheed seems to be more like the go-to guy for Derek Carr in that offense, but Carr did suffer an injury towards the end of the game, and the Saints are making a change at the QB position for the time being. So we'll see if Olave can bounce back next week with more targets and more receptions. Next up on the list here, we got Dalton Kincaid. Josh Allen didn't really have his best game against the Texans, so the tight end only scored 4.4 points here. And next up we have Terry McLaurin with 4 catches for 112 yards. Pretty solid number for a receiver. He did carry it 1 time for 2 yards as well. We're going to move on now to Rockstar Domination. As I mentioned before, Josh Allen didn't really have his best game in Houston. You know, 15.95 fantasy points going up against the Texans defense, who held Josh Allen to a career low completion rate of 30%, allowing him to get only 4 yards per attempt average. 30 attempts, only completing 9 for 131 yards and a touchdown. Next up, we have Kyren Williams, continues to be the primary workhorse for the Los Angeles Rams. He had 22 carries for 109 yards and a touchdown, and put up 15 fantasy points. Pretty solid number, pretty consistent so far out of Kyren. All right, next we have the Broncos running back, Javonte Williams, another Williams. He played against the Raiders, scored 13.6 fantasy points, had 13 carries for 61 yards and 50 receiving yards. Next up, we have Deebo Samuel, who absolutely disappointed this game with only 2.5 points, 1 reception for 11 yards and 9 rushing yards. Nothing special here. Next up, we have George Pickens here. A little off game for him this week. In week 4, he saw 79% of snaps in the 12 personnel. Week 5, though, he only saw 1 out of 20 snaps on the 12 personnel. This could mean he isn't blocking very good, or they're just trying to not tire him out. And Mike Tomlin was also speaking to reporters and said that he feels like if he gave Pickens less playing time, it'll maximize his productivity. I don't know how that's gonna work, but that's what he said to the reporters. Next up, we have the great pickup here from Michael with Tucker Kraft. He was electric in SoFi last week. 4 receptions for 88 yards, 2 touchdowns for 22.8 points. Kraft was in the game for 80% of the offensive snaps, really making a statement here for a tight end. Next up, we have Chuba Hubbard. Despite his team losing, still put up some solid numbers in fantasy. 13 carries for 97 yards, 15.5 fantasy points. He also scored a touchdown in his last 3 games since the start of Andy Dalton, so we should continue to see him as the primary back in Carolina. Michael did leave 15.5 points here on the bench with Zay Flowers, who caught 7 passes for 111 yards. Congratulations, Michael, for this win this week. We're going to move on now to the last 2 matchups of the week. Last 2 matchups are the TS Boys matchups. We're going to start up with the Scrub Club and the Trophy Son. For the Scrub Club, the top scorers were Geno Smith, T. Higgins, Derrick Henry. On the other side, we have Brock Bowers, Justin Fields, and Rashid Shaheed. Nothing too crazy here. I do want to point out though, T. Higgins is a beast. He's seen an increase in targets. He was 2 targets shy of matching the targets he had in the first 2 games this season. Great performance out of the man. We're going to start off here on the left side for the Scrub Club. We got Geno Smith going up against the Giants. Geno Smith was pretty consistent this week. The Giants defense did get to him many times though. A lot of his throws were short passes, so he couldn't get a deep ball down to his receivers. Still though, he protected the ball really well this week. He's thrown 4 interceptions coming into this game, and he's put up 25.4 fantasy points for Ryan. Next up, we have Derrick Henry against his new divisional rivals, the Bengals. 15 carries, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Derrick Henry has gotten a touchdown every game this season, so there was no way he wasn't going to get another one, especially on the goal line. He did get hit in the backfield though for his safety, but other than that, solid performance out of him. Next up, we have Jaleel McLaughlin. He only had 6 carries for 22 yards, but caught a touchdown for 10 fantasy points. And then we have Amari Cooper, who caught 4 of his targets for 60 yards. That offense is disastrous. Next up, we have Deontay Johnson, 3 receptions for 23 yards, 4.4 fantasy points. After coming off the last 2 games with at least 13 plus targets, the reduction to 6 really hurt his production here, but they were playing the Bears though, and the Bears defense has been really good, ranking first in points per game and takeaway since week 12 last season. Next, we have Travis Kelce here, who continues to see more targets with Rashee Rice out. 9 receptions for 70 yards. With the Chiefs still looking for the true wide receiver, Mahomes is going to be looking for Kelce, and he scored 11.5 fantasy points here. Next, T. Higgins. I mentioned last week that Higgins has a very high ceiling, and this is what we saw this week. 9 receptions for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns, 24.8 fantasy points. He's returned to full health and is now the Bengals' top target earner. Even though he hasn't been getting a reception of more than 20 yards, the Bengals have been using him a lot in the short passing games, and that's what he's relied on: continued volume and touchdowns. Next up, we have the Broncos defense with 1 pick 6 from Patrick Surtain and scored 15 points for Ryan. Alright, we move on to Trophy Son. Allen continues to play the wrong guy at the flex positions, and he knows this. Besides that, week 4, Allen played Juwan Jennings over Rico Dowdle, who's looking to take over the running back 1 position on that Dallas offense from Zeke. Allen also had Justin Fields here with 17.25 points. He did throw for 2 touchdowns this game, but it just felt like the offense couldn't get anything going really. They didn't score a touchdown till like second half. Next up, we have Bijan Robinson here, who I've mentioned before in the last video that they're not utilizing him well as a running back. We see them put him on blocking duty a lot. The times he's gotten the ball, he runs really good. So I don't understand why they're not really letting him run it. Great player, just not utilized properly. He's got 12 carries for 61 yards and 12 receiving yards. Kirk was throwing a ton that game though, so that takes away from Bijan's usage. Next, we have Rachaad White. Again, with Baker's running backs, you just have to be patient, I feel like. There are games that they will pop off, but there are games that just makes you want to curse Baker's name, man. Like, the high is mid, and the lows are just low as shit with Baker's running back. 10 carries for 72 yards, 8.1 fantasy points. Next up for Allen, we got Xavier Worthy, who's seen continued usage now with Rashee Rice out. Targeted 6 times, he got 3 for 25 yards, and he also had 1 touchdown on the ground. He's going to start being utilized more now in that offense now, but we do need to keep an eye out for continued usage for Kelce and Juju Smith-Schuster. Next for Allen's team, we got Rashid Shaheed, who was dominating the first half of the game against the Chiefs. 4 receptions for 89 yards and a touchdown, 16.6 fantasy points. Derek Carr got hurt towards the end of the game though, and Rashid Shaheed was Derek Carr's go-to guy in that offense. He had a really nice diving catch for a touchdown as well. Moving on, we have Brock Bowers. Brock was targeted a lot this game. 12 targets. He got 8 for 97 yards and a touchdown. The big reception for the touchdown came early in the game, and he's starting to look solidified in that offense. Juwan Jennings is up next though with 1.8 points, catching only 1 of his 4 targets for 13 yards. Pretty disappointing display here for Juwan Jennings. And we have the Washington Commander defense with 14 points. They sacked Deshaun Watson 7 times and recovered 1 fumble. Allen did leave some points on the bench here with Rico Dowdle and Pitts, but that's all in hindsight. All I gotta say is congratulations to the Scrub Club for the win this week. Moving to the last and final matchup for week 5, and that's going to be Flonos and the Asparagus. Justin took the win here. The top scorers were Trevor Lawrence for Adam, Will Lutz, and Christian Kirk. On the other side, we have Kyler Murray, Josh Jacobs, and Trey Sermon. Starting off on the left side here with the Flonos, we have Trevor Lawrence, who's starting to feel more confident. Threw 34 times for 28 completions, 371 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He did turn it over once though and scored 24.95 fantasy points. Next up, we have Travis Etienne, who was out carried this week by Tank Bixby. He's got 6 carries this week for 17 yards and 43 receiving yards for 9 fantasy points. Emmanuel Wilson, I get because Jonathan Taylor was out this week. Just unfortunate he didn't produce much, only saw 6 carries for 24 yards and 2 fantasy points. And for Adam, even with Tank Bixby on the bench going off, Adam still wouldn't have scored enough points this week. On the other hand, though, for the Asparagus, they did their thing, Kyler Murray and the Cardinals somehow pulled off the dub against the Niners. He was running a lot this game as well, 83 rushing yards and a touchdown. He also threw for 195 yards and a touchdown as well. 26 fantasy points right there. Then we have the starting running back now on the Packers for Josh Jacobs with 15.9 points, 19 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. He also had 21 receiving yards. Next up, we have Najee Harris. The Steelers offense were slow in week 5 and Najee Harris was no exception. He carried the ball 14 times for 42 yards, 3 yards per carry, and caught 2 for 35 yards, 8.7 fantasy points. Next up, we have Michael Pittman with 12 fantasy points. He was just shy of 40 receiving yards with 5 receptions and a touchdown. Then we have Wanda Robinson, who was getting targeted a lot in the short passing game with 13 points. He had 6 receptions for 36 yards and a touchdown. Next, we have Jake Ferguson here, who continues to see consistent targets, 7+ in his last 3 games. He caught 6 passes from Dak for 70 yards and 10 fantasy points. And then we have Trey Sermon with 15 points. With Jonathan Taylor out, the Colts looked to Sermon to be the running back. He ran the ball 10 times for 38 yards and a touchdown. He also caught the ball 6 times for 25 yards as well. Congratulations to Justin for the win this week. Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally finished the recap of week 5 matchups. We're going to be moving on now to week 6 matchups, and I will give my predictions on who I think will win this week. And by the way, just for your reference, I was 5-1 from week 5 predictions. So let's see if I can keep it up this week. We'll start off with the bottom here and work our way up again, just like last time. We got All I Do Is Win versus the Scrub Club. Yeah, we're looking at the matchups here. I think the Scrub Club got this one in the bag. Anthony Richardson against the Tennessee Titans defense, who's been very good this season. Tyjae Spears, who we all know Tony Pollard is their primary running back in their offense. Garrett Wilson against the Bills defense. The Bills defense hasn't allowed more than 100 receiving yards to any player this season and haven't allowed more than 1 receiving touchdown to an opposing player this season. So it'll be a tough matchup for Garrett Wilson here. The Lions defense has been pretty bad against the pass, and Jalen Tolbert has been getting more and more targets from Dak, so he will be an interesting player to keep an eye on. Trey McBride versus Packers here. We'll look for Kyler Murray to target him more for this game. And then we have DJ Moore versus Jacksonville, and the Jacks have not lost in London. We will see if the defense can keep up with DJ Moore and Caleb Williams' stride though. But for the Scrub Club though, I like the matchups for him a lot. Derrick Henry versus Washington. There's going to be a lot of running from both Lamar and the primary back Derrick Henry, and as well as the other side team as well in Jaden Daniels and like Austin Eckler. T. Higgins versus Giants could be nutty as well. The Bengals offensive line can allow Burrow some time to find Higgins downfield. Otherwise, he'll be used again in the short passing game like last week. Next up, we have Deontay Johnson here, who's looking to get back those targets he was seeing the 2 weeks prior to coming into this last week game. He's looking to bounce back when they face Atlanta Falcons. This could be a high scoring game. So if this game ends up being the same way as last week, it'll force the Panthers to throw a lot more. And the guy Andy Dalton is going to look for is going to be Deontay Johnson. Jahmyr Gibbs versus the Cowboys here might also prove promising. Gibbs is coming off a bye, and the Cowboys defense has allowed more than 100 yards to 2 players this season, and I feel like Gibbs is more incapable of doing so. The Cowboys defense have also allowed 5 players to score at least 1 rushing touchdown against them. So I think Ryan's got this one in the bag. Next, we move on to the next one up, and that's going to be Rockstar Domination versus Team Brax. This week, I like Braxton's matchups a little more, so I have to go with Braxton's team. Kirk Cousins against the Panthers. He could go berserk this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown versus the Cowboys could be a good matchup for him as well. And earlier in the week, Braxton has acquired CeeDee Lamb from a boss, who's still the Cowboys' primary target. He's also got Jaden Reed going up against the Cardinals defense. Only one concern for Braxton is though Roschon Johnson. Are we going to get lucky again with DeAndre Swift getting stopped in the red zone for Roschon to come in and vulture the touchdowns? We shall see. I don't know. On the other side, Michael has some good matchups as well. He's got Tony Pollard going up against a divisional rival. He's got AJ Brown back from the injury against the Browns. Debo's already got 19 points for him. And who knows, this game could go either way, but I'm calling Braxton on this one. Next one up, we have Flonos and I Hate Kirk Cousins. Really close in projections here, and Adam is out of starting running backs, but J.K. Dobbins out of a bye could be huge for him. I think I'll take Adam's team this week, but it's going to be a very close matchup, I feel like. Dak versus the Lions defense that have allowed 27th most passing yards this season, along with J.K. Dobbins and Tank Bigsby. Collins also got C.J. Stroud going up against Christian Gonzalez and the Patriots defense. Dolphins, and Braylon Allen against the Bills. Just some tough matchups there. On top of that, he's got DeAndre Hopkins with Will Levis thrown to him. I'm not a big Will Levis believer, so I feel like that's going to be a tough matchup for him. Colin does have Jamar Chase, but one man alone isn't going to win you a game, so I have to take Adam's team this week. Moving on to the next matchup, we have the Trophy Son versus Asparagus. A lot of mixed feelings here. One day you get a text that Allen has given up, and the next day you get a text that he's going to rip Justin's nipples off. Pretty even matchups here across the board though. Allen's got Justin Fields versus the Raiders, Bijan versus the Panthers, who allowed both of the Bears running backs to score a touchdown last week. We will see if Bijan can back one or two touchdowns here and there. Buggy Irving, I'm not a big fan of Baker's running backs, as I've mentioned before. And Calvin Ridley, you know, I'm not a big fan of Will Levis. I'm not sure he's going to be throwing it backwards, sideways. It's really hard to expect anything big. Rashid Shaheed against Tampa could be a tough matchup without Derek Carr. And if Spencer Rattler is in as QB, he has already told reporters that his job is clear and simple. Chris Olave. Brock Bowers against the Steelers could be a tough matchup here as well. The Steelers defense will be looking to get to the QB quick, whether that be Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell. But if anything, Brock Bowers is going to be used for those short receptions. And then we got Rico Dowdle. Could be a big play for Allen here because say Dak gets the ball down in the red zone. Dowdle, who's starting to look more and more like the Cowboys running back one, could be getting those red zone usage. On the other side for Justin, we got Saquon Barkley against the Browns defense with Myles Garrett still dealing with his foot injury. He's looking at 80% right now in his health. Saquon could look to have a big game against the Browns defense, who will eventually end up on the field a ton because their offense has been disappointing, leaving the defense to come in and clean up their mess. Josh Jacobs with a good matchup against a very low ranked defense from Arizona. They're also playing at home. Jacobs could have a really good game here. Ladd McConkey is coming off a bye here, and we absolutely are looking for the Chargers offense to reset and draw up a new plan that could see Ladd with more targets and workload for this week. Malik Neighbors is out again this week for a concussion, so Wan'Dale Robinson could continue to be that quick passes for Daniel Jones. And so overall, I think Justin has a better chance of winning this week. Will Levis and Calvin Ridley could prove me wrong though, and the Colts defense have been allowing the most explosive plays this season, according to a true Colts fan. But if we don't get the Will Levis that tosses the ball backwards or sideways, and Rashid Shaheed continues to see his target despite Derek Carr's absence, Justin's got this one in the bag. Next matchup we have is TitanUp versus Houday and the Blowfish. I think Erman's team has a lot more legitimate chance of winning this week. He's got Joe Burrow against the Giants defense, and he's just coming off a 5 touchdowns, 392 yards game against the Ravens. The Giants defense are worse than the Ravens defense. Burrow could be making a lot of these short passes to his receivers if the Giants defense can turn up like they did against the Seahawks and Geno Smith. DeAndre Swift is looking to take down Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars for the first time in London this week. The Bears also got to England days ahead of the game to adjust to the environment. Diggs will more than likely be covered by Christian Gonzalez, so we'll see how that matchup goes here. Darnell Mooney again could have a good week going up against the Panthers. They could have a high scoring game as well. On the other side for Tate, we have Jordan Love going up against the Cardinals in Green Bay. You know who's going to turn up. Tate's also got Alvin Kamara, who's back to full health, and if the QB filling in for Carr doesn't work out this week, the workload could fall in his hands. Tate's got Mike Evans up against Marshawn Lattimore. Could be a good matchup between them. If it's a high scoring game where Baker will be forced to throw a ball a lot, you could expect the two to have good matchup. Other than that, man, Tate has Ray McLeod and an offense full of weapons like Drake London and Darnell Mooney and even Kyle Pitts, Bijan. So I think this week Urban takes another one and improves to 5-1. Last matchup we have here is my matchup against the boss. I felt good coming into this week, but my running backs are starting to drop like flies. James Cook could miss time. Stevenson is missing time already. And Brian Robinson was just downgraded to out for this week. However, I am hoping that Lamar and Brian Thomas Jr. at least could go off this week. On the other side though, for a boss, he's got David Montgomery versus Dallas, who has been allowing at least a touchdown to a running back this season. Montgomery is due for a big game. Drake London versus Panthers this week could also be big. Dalton Kincaid and Jalen Hurts. I don't want to have to do this to my team, but I fear a boss has the better edge than I do on this one, just because my running back positions are currently at risk. That is all for today, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck to all the South FFL members this week in fantasy, and I'll catch you next time.